Hello. So, I'd like to know what conclusions, if any, you've come to. We put some sort of questions to you, and what conclusions? Tell us what you think about this.
I think we ignored the questions, didn't we?
We actually brought our own dishes in the end, but they were inspired by the dishes you gave us in a way, and the film that you'd been talking about. Partly, I think, because both of us are actually lucky in one way that we work with things that we enjoy anyway, and so a lot of the conversations happen in our work. And I was thinking about the place I personally have a really horrible time is in the bank. Is actually trying to make it pay, and then think about the impersonality of the bank, or the systems being made by some computer who you're not actually talking to, because the people you're talking to can't make those decisions. And then we were thinking about maybe what were the difficulties where is you've got the voice of the person running a company, or the bank's computer, or the boss of somewhere is very separate from the people who work there, and then also another group of the people who actually make up the red tape and the systems, because in one of the films it seemed to be the person who was trying to keep the systems going, the systems in place, was almost blocking anything from actually happening. And so how do you find a space where people all step into that space? So it was something to do with that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's about ways of trying to break down the sort of the rule book, the way these organisations are run, and give a bit more flexibility. I think it's a bit more freedom. And we talked about one of the spaces very local to here is the Royal Festival Hall, which is a very democratic building where you're going there for concerts, but there'll be people sitting there having knitting lessons, people with their laptops plugged in and using electricity and doing some work there. And it just seems to have happened very without any sort of control. People are very free to use that building. And I think so. Things do happen, but it'd be interesting to see how that sort of flips into a more commercial environment, like a supermarket or a bank.
That's right. So, how would you apply this to your own? What occupation do you have? What do you do?
I work with images or photographs. Trying to see if images actually democratise conversation more, and so that help patients and doctors communicate by having an image in their consultation. And I work with medical students thinking how they can maybe expand the type of dialogue they have with their patients by using images as a trigger, which allow a lot of different meanings or different layers in communication to come up. So I suppose I was really fascinated by what you're saying about communication and the arts, and I think a lot of arts can expand the way we communicate with each other. And I was just thinking, when you're looking down at me like that, I'm really quite mesmerised by your very large face there, and it's very different from talking to your little face here, which is sort of I can interact much more with this big face, and it was quite odd at the beginning when I was thinking about communication, and yet you're communicating with us through this screen, through this filter. And for some reason, maybe because your face is so big here, I was really held by it. But there are other points where maybe we stand back and we look at a screen and we look at something digitally and we're not exchanging. So there are not so many places we have these interacting. It's quite odd to talk about communication through this medium.
Yeah.
What do you feel about that?
But you're now living in the year 2013, and we are all going to be talking through screens. And the great advantage is that if you use a screen, you can talk to somebody 60 miles away, and it has weaknesses. I agree. I think it's much better to be face to face, but it's not disastrous. But still, I'm interested to. Sorry, I'm interested by what you're saying about. You seem to be a consultant, are you?
No. I've been a patient, but I'm an artist. So yeah. I co-create images with patients to try and, out of that process, make them together, and then those images are then used actually in different consultations with other patients and doctors to see if that changes the type of conversation that normally happens in that room. And it seems to bring other, in a way like you were finding with your menued meals in the evenings, I think it brings up lots of other things that would not otherwise get talked about in that space.
So you are fishing for what they will talk about rather than saying what they could talk about.
Yeah, providing a catalyst.
That's right. Well, that is in keeping with modern artistic criteria. And you're saying, provided they talk, that's good. And I'm saying everything what matters most is what they talk about. And there's a difference between us then. And what I'm saying is that one's got to have an idea of what is worth talking about. Is it worth talking about football? Is it worth talking about Mr. Cameron? Or have you a goal in life? What would therefore be your ideal conversation? What is the purpose of conversation?
If you're asking me, I think the purpose is to almost, as you say, maybe understand another human being that you wouldn't otherwise know, and you get given something else at the end of the conversation you didn't have at the beginning. But when you say what's important to talk about and what isn't, I think with doctors and patients, or with any two people, what they think is important will be different. So maybe what's interesting is when those two different perspectives meet in the middle and they move in some way. So suddenly something, I mean, I hate football, but occasionally someone might say something which has a tiny fragment that gives me an insight into something that I wouldn't have experienced otherwise.
Yes.
So it's not really the subject matter that's important, maybe there's something human to do with human contact within it.
I'm saying the subject matter is important because ultimately the subject matter is how should we live? And the reality about time is that we have no clear idea of what we should be doing. We'll be devoting ourselves to making money, we'll be devoting ourselves to raising children. What kind of life would you like to have had when you are about to part away? What have you missed in life? Now, if you talk about football or anything else, you will have missed talking about philosophy and physics. And in your scheme, those people are not used to talking about physics, but physics is about the universe, and it's the structure of matter. And it seems to me to understand that is part of a full life. And so my reaction to yours is to say that I think one needs to have a goal in a conversation rather than just to converse. What do you think? I'm looking at your partner now. What kind of work do you do?
I'm an architect. So,
yeah.
And no, I was interested in some of the things that you were talking about, particularly things like the IKEA space. And I think their shops are very prescriptive, and I don't think they necessarily give a lot of flexibility for people to have sort of conversations. And I can see that you're trying to break that down. But there's a project that we're currently working on, which is with a housing association, and they've given away half of their premises to a series of local community uses, and I think that's going to. And we've used the idea of a sort of market hall environment to generate their building, and we think what that's going to do is offer lots of opportunities for new conversations to happen, for new people to meet. And they've been very good in actually effectively giving away 50% of their building for free. And I think there aren't many buildings around which aren't very prescriptive in terms of their use. And I think one thing is about trying to break those spaces down and give people the opportunities to meet and discuss.
Whereabouts it?
The building. It's in Bromley in South London. And it's run by a community housing association, so an organisation that took over from a local authority, and they've already got 3 tenants in their building. So they've got a credit union, so it's a community bank. They've got a training kitchen, which will encourage local sort of residents to cook, and they've also got some small sort of start-up business units. So they're effectively being very philanthropic and giving away space to actually generate some more, a community sort of centre. Yeah.
Comment I would make on community, I'd like to in on that, is the thing about communities is that they talk to one another, they talk to each other. and they have less inducement to talk to people outside the community. And what we have found frequently is that, for example, ethnic communities tend to keep together, and people in different social classes tend to keep together. And so you are creating a community of people who are going to be inward-looking, as it were. That is ancient.
Possibly, although the community is very diverse, so there's nothing. The group of people that have moved this area are very diverse, and there's nothing that's been descriptive about them moving there. So it's their building, and I think, and there's nothing to stop anybody else coming into the ground floor of this building. In the same way as I think with the festival hall, which is near here.
Well, what I'd argue against that, and I quite see that in architecture you have to work within the boundaries set by your clients. But if I think about how people's lives are different now, how people's aspirations are different now from what they were a century ago, it is they want to discover the world. They want to see more of life. They want to get out of their bubbles. And architecture by itself hasn't got the means to do that. Architecture is about a fixed place. And until architects also become designers of spaceships, enable you to go and spend the weekend in Beijing, you're hampered by this tradition of architecture is about, except architects also design cities. And it's very interesting. This week, 3 people came to Paris to interview me about where they redesigned a greater Paris, and they are spending 30 billion euros on it. And I found their ideas rather limited. I mean, they included architects and people like that. And all they had thought of was how to create metro line, underground, train lines, and travel between different suburbs. And I thought this was a very limited idea. They weren't planning for the 22nd century. They were using simply the influence of this century. And I think this is a danger. When one's planning, one usually takes what exists at one own time, rather than say what could exist in the future, and what is wrong with our society now, and what we want, what will the next generation want. But still, what you're saying is interesting, and one wouldn't mind seeing this paper in Bromley when it gets going. Very nice to see what actually happens. Of course, as an architect, we don't know what will happen. You'll probably be surprised.
I think we've got no idea how it's going to pan out, so it'd be interesting. I mean, it opens in 6 months' time, so and we've got no idea who ultimately will be using it. So, but it's designed to be very flexible, and and it may be in 5 years' time it's completely different.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thank you, John. Are there 2 more volunteers?
Yeah, if you want to do people. Okay.
Good evening there.
Good evening to you. And have you had a decent conversation?
Yes.
Yes.
we have, and I think I've just been enlightened sort of to the place this is.
Yeah, we talk more about the college here because I study ceramics here and I really enjoy it. It's been a fantastic experience, and I'm afraid we didn't really stick to the script very much.
But we did discuss how much we find work so boring, and that we spend our days fantasizing about what we really want to be doing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's to some extent.
What did you find boring in your work?
I think the fact that you know, I work in an industry just based on majority of the case just fulfilling targets and making sure that targets are fulfilled rather than human needs are fulfilled. And just to explain, I'm a school teacher.
Which industry is this?
Secondary school education.
God, is that so dominated by target? It must be, I suppose. Because
Yes, I mean, it is, and I think I really wanted to ask you how we could, what sort of things we would need to do to develop young people to start thinking more like people who want to do this My IKEA sort of project and sort of that sort of thing.
yes, well, I think that's again exactly what I was saying about the architecture of the previous building. A school is a ghetto. It is an isolated place. And it's very bizarre when you come to think of it, that you isolate children of a certain age from the world. And, you know, in the past, they would get to work at the age of 7 or 5 or even, and they would discover what life was about. Of course, we don't like that, we're protecting them, but I think there's a little trick in that. If we didn't isolate them in schools, they would be out of work. And we're sort of concealing unemployment in the school. On the ground that they shouldn't be exploited or what. But when they do get into work, they are exploited by all their education. So the question in the school is how can one get them out of their little world? One cannot get ideas from other people. You need interacting with other people. To get interact from people exactly the same level, the same age, the same background, means you never get interactive, all saying the same thing. And definitely what will open the gates of the school and target basically about examinations and all the rest of it. Well, examinations are very good for the people target examinations, but they're not for anyone else. And I personally, I spent my early years passing examinations, and thanks to that I got a job. But it made me a narrow specialist, to specialize in a particular way, in one period, one sub. And I think I spent my life liberating myself from education. So the people in schools have a very difficult task. They've got, of course, ministers telling them what to do, and they've got all the powers telling them what to do. And it may be schools are large, aren't they? Yeah, but to that people. One wonders, you know, whether somebody wants to do the calculation, supposing every 5 children had one tutor, like the aristocracy of one at a time, and the tutor had to teach them everything. Would it be better or worse?
I mean, it's an interesting point, isn't it? I guess it depends on who the tutor is and who the child is. But I think if you were a head teacher, it'd be how much would that cost, and that would be the main thing. And then they say 1 to 5. That's not very feasible, and that's why we have a situation where we have 1 to 30 at the moment, and that's and then we have sort of McDonald's education, you could say, fast education.
Yeah. You won't have to pay 100,000.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to pay the caretaker, and you wouldn't have to pay overheads and the big thing, everything else. And then you say, who would be the teacher? Well, he would be probably an artist or somebody doing a higher degree or something like that, who would put part of his day teaching and part of his work. And you know how many most famous writers were tutors like that. tutors to the children of people who could afford it. And but that was an option, you see. And it'd be nice if someone calculated this. Are you in the administration of secondary?
Me personally?
Yes, you do administration of secondary education.
I try to avoid doing as much administration as possible.
But you have to.
But I have to. But personally, I'm a maths. I have to teach the subject of maths to my children, and that's what I'm hired to do.
What else would you like to be?
Well, what I personally enjoy teaching children is about the future, and obviously this is what sort of attracted me to this event, of just talking to kids about how life will be in the future. And as you say, I mean, today I was talking to kids about in a year's time it'll be 100 years since we had World War One, and how the world has shaped and changed so exponentially. The world has changed now. And how we and talking to them, and how we could have a lesson over Twitter rather than sitting there with pens and papers, and that's the sort of things I like getting children to think about the future, how to have the visions of futures and how to make that vision come true.
That is absolutely excellent. And like here, that is exactly what teaching is about. Life. And of course, you can teach them maths. They need to learn maths. It's important, but this is considered, against the target. You're supposed to cram them, aren't you?
Exactly. I spend a lot of time being told off. I think I've spent more time in the head's office as a teacher than I did as a child. For those sort of things. But I think in some cases you'll always need a maverick to sort of change the system. And
you are criticised for talking about these things.
Regularly.
Really?
Regularly. Yes. I mean, but then you can, as long as you're doing things that are appreciated. So if you are controlling the class, so if you have that classroom management, then they leave you alone because you seem to have done something right. And as long as you can produce progress, then that's another thing where they leave you alone. But overall, it's like, that's something it shouldn't be done. But then you're battling against people who are like, we need to make sure attendance is up and etc., and all these things, not really taking into consideration the actual person and the human being sometimes.
Yeah.
That's quite often the case in education, you could see.
How do children react?
Some concerned, some are too busy daydreaming about playing on their Xbox. But you see, that's the sort of take I look at it. As when I look at it, as if a child spends so many hours playing a video game and enjoying it, then how comes education can't be like that?
Yeah.
And introducing the whole gaming and gamification and introducing that sort of point system, building that motivation into children, and that's and you see that's looked upon as you can't have. I think literally my head sort of said, we can't have play, we must be serious.
Really?
And there's no learning taking place. I said, well, to play a game, you have to learn how to play it, don't you? And people very much take play very seriously, don't they?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That is my criticism of universities, which teach you about one subject, but they don't teach you about life.
Yes.
Well, your neighbour, what did you say? You were a student of ceramics?
Me, yes. Hello. At Morley College and at somewhere else. For 3 years I've been studying what I wish I'd spent my whole life studying. And I can remember being 10 and going for my interview at my secondary school and saying that's what I wanted to do. And I never got a chance to do it. And my life has completely changed since I've been doing it. It's wonderful. Yes. So the job I do now, I picked a place to work which is near to Morley College so that I can get here for 6 o'clock to do my class, and it's completely changed my whole approach to seeing myself as a teachable person, and I have a very positive, a lot of it's about the relationship I have as a student with my tutor, and I really value that. Because I never really had a particular rapport with my teachers at school and university, so it's really good.
Well, I agree, and all life is in fact study in the sense that it's discovery of what the world is about. And the question is whether, having finished studying ceramics and become the best ceramist in the world, you will then go and study something else.
I think I probably would. It would be I find with learning it's all a web and stepping stones, but it's really changed my attitude to myself. As you know, as being sort of suddenly totally different relationship with a teacher that I always wanted to have with the past, but I never ever did in any of the subjects I studied before. So.
It's very important to have a relationship.
Yeah.
And usually it's only one teacher out of 20 that one finds.
Yeah. Well, I'm just so grateful to have finally found it. So it's really good. Yeah.
Well, if that's what Morley College has, then I congratulate it. And may it live.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Who else would like to come up? Who has the courage to come up? Well, John, you better pick someone and bring them up.
I'm not sure of manhandling onto this chair. Anyone else?
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello. Well, tell me what you have been thinking in this last hour.
Well, I think you have a lot of very interesting ideas. I don't agree with everything you've said, but particularly on the nature of work and how it has to change because our society has changed. I mean, at the moment we have a situation where half the society works too much, is under enormous stress and pressure, and the other half of the society don't have enough work, and they have equal stresses of economic stress and psychological and so on. And I mean, I think what we need to do, we need to share the work more evenly through society, you know, and we need some sort of system of work share, I think, or job share, you know, where
the same kind of work?
For example, I don't know, teaching or whatever it is. I mean, even working in a bank, instead of one person working 5 days a week, they could work 3 days or 2 days, and then another person could work the rest of the week, and everyone would have work, but they'd also have more leisure time as well, and of course they would get paid less, but they'd have less stress, and of course we'd have to rearrange the whole system of the cost of living, you know, to adjust to the less income.
And that's a very important point, because at the moment we have a system which encourages everything to become more expensive, because you need more and more gadgets, you need more and more things, and even rich people poor because they cannot buy all the things they need, they think they need. And so this is a technical issue. How can we produce food and clothing and housing at really rock bottom rate, and indeed ideally that should be a human right to have clothes and food and a house. And you know, that's all sort of an agenda for the next century. There is a danger about it. I like the idea of people doing several jobs, little bits of jobs. It's very difficult to have in the present system. Although many young people are indeed doing part-time jobs usually as a necessity. But still, I'm interested to see that you have, what is your reaction to this? When I point at you, the lady sitting next to you.
Our reaction to what exactly?
Yes. What have you been thinking?
Lots of things. I think my conversationalist partner, I think he has a point in all the things that he says, and I agree. I think one of the main problems is then how do we go about getting there? Because I think a lot of us agree about a lot of the problems that we all have in our jobs, in today's consumer society, but how do we go to make a real change? Because I feel I get frustrated with a lot of my friends that we talk and talk and talk and talk, but we all get stuck at then what do we do? Who does what, and how do we make a substantial change in the world, really? So I don't know, really. I don't know. I think sorry.
You see, the answer I give is it's very difficult to change everything overnight, but it is possible to try and carry out some experiments in the existing system, which will allow us to try things out to see whether they will work. And that is what we try to do in IKEA. Say, okay, you can continue making your profit and doing what you like, but let us try something and see what happens. And the first stage, therefore, is to find businesses, organizations, corporations, or whatever it is, who are willing to participate in some kind of experiment which will not endanger their profitability or their functioning, but will be exactly what a scientist does in a laboratory, a scientist experiment. And a society which does not experiment is doomed, it's finished, it's asleep.
Yeah.
Yes. So do you think then the way forward is to try to make little changes in sort of your local place of work or your local neighborhood, or do you think that...
You start there, because there you will see the problems. You will see that many people don't want to change.
Oh, I know.
So you have to accept that. And it will take them 5-10 years before they get used to the idea that they could do things differently. We must accept that most people want security.
Yes.
They're frightened of change. And therefore those who are more adventurous have to do it in a way which is conciliatory, just to frighten everyone. But as your colleague was saying, we've got to reduce the cost of living we've got to make it possible this future, and that is a long-term goal.
Yes.
How to develop technology which will enable us to live more cheaply, because we cannot go on just living more and more expensively.
I mean, the irony is that the computer age was supposed to create more leisure time for people.
Yeah.
In fact, the opposite has happened. We have more work, a higher workload for those in work.
Yes.
And another aspect to it is the malaise of our society, our civilization, is excess. We live on excess. We create enormous waste. We consume enormous amounts of raw materials, and we consume far more than we need. And I think actually, supermarkets and stores like IKEA and so on are actually implicit or complicit in this excessive consumer society. And it's all based on sweatshops in Asia, largely. The sweat and labor of people in the third world. And I think, you ask a question of people in the store. Do you ever think about who made this? What are their lives like, and how could we somehow appreciate or show our appreciation? And I think that's a very good idea. That is somehow or other. I mean, I always like to look at the labels on things to see where they're made and where they come from, at least. And but perhaps IKEA could could develop some sort of a feedback system with the I don't know, the workers in India or China or Bangladesh, and have videos of their workplace, or even some way of acknowledging them.
Yes, I've been investigating that, and indeed, I was invited back here to India, and I went to the factory which makes those lampshades.
All right, yeah.
And there were 200 women sitting in a big place making lampshades all day. And I said to the boss, why don't you give these women some education as well? And he asked them, and then he said, well, supposing I give you an hour of education, would you agree to lose 1 hour's of wages? And 75% of them said yes.
Yeah.
Because it would make their life better, will make their children's life better. Their children will not have to be makers of lampshade. And that is what I'm talking about, the mixture of you have to work, but if we introduce education into it, instead of education being something separate, make work something, make work a source of intellectual improvement.
Absolutely.
So because they know they will learn something interesting.
Something creative and that teaches you about life as well, as you said, and not separates you from ordinary life. I mean, you said people who go to university, they become specialists in one subject, but when they leave university, they know nothing about ordinary life. I mean, how to, look after themselves and whatnot. And education, true education, is really about life. And I think another suggestion you made about bringing in tutors or part-time tutors into all schools, primary, secondary, or whatever. You could bring in people from other areas, like even when I was in school, we would have policemen or firemen or farmers or from different areas of life, who could share their experience with students and give them the benefit of their experience. I mean, it doesn't have to be just the teacher giving a lesson in order to make sure that they pass their exams. I mean, that is not education in my view. That is what's the word, brainwashing, or
Yes.
like a kind of factory.
Well, it's very
education.
In fact, it's very interesting. It shows that everyone is trying something, is trying to do something different, but not finding the circumstances, and not getting aid, getting help in doing it. And that, I think, is the next stage of what we're trying to do in a way, which is the ambition of the Oxford Muse as a foundation, a non-profit foundation, to discover who it is who's willing to go on these adventures, and how one can do it, given the fact money has to be paid, you have to pay your rent. That's the big problem.
But,
well, thank you very much. Let's give someone else a chance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Who else wants to talk? Or have you had enough? Well, it seems the shy people don't want to talk. All right. Well, I find what you've said very interesting, and it shows that we ought to be thinking about these things, not only just to be thinking, but ought to see how we can do it in a practical way. And I hope that Morley College will think about how it can add to its discipline, different disciplines, opportunities for the invention of work in the future. So I hope this evening has been useful in making you think about more than, who's going to win the next football match. And perhaps we will get it together again one day and say, well, let us do something. Let us do something, which may be necessary as gradually most significantly collapsing into bankruptcy. We may be forced to do that. So, well, I thank you for coming. It's been very interesting getting into Morley College, and I hope we will meet again. So thank you.